Hello, everyone, and welcome to Next Generation Registries. Both the chat and Q&A features will be available throughout this session, so please ask questions, make comments, and stay engaged. Thank you for joining us today and for attending this session. Now I'll turn it over to the moderator to introduce today's panelists.
Thanks, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. As Andrea said, today's presentation is on Next Generation Registries. Many CMSS members and others who manage clinical registries, particularly those who have QCDRs for MIPS, are looking to leverage their products to be more useful to members, generate their own revenue if feasible, and also begin to anticipate what additional resources or partnerships may be needed to continue to meet members' needs. So we asked our speakers to join us today because I think they will bring various opportunities and partnerships to the table that all of you may be interested in exploring, and each will share their vision on how we will advance the field to the next generation of registry platforms. So joining us today, we have Bill Marks, who is the head of clinical science and head of neurology at Verily Life Sciences. He's also an adjunct clinical professor of neurology and neurological sciences at Stanford University School of Medicine. We also have Sharon Muscatell, who is the Vice President of Strategy and Collaboratives at the Strategic Health Information Exchange Collaborative. And last but not least, Cory Wiegert, who is CEO of CancerLink and Executive Vice President at ASCO. So we're going to have each of them present, and then we will have Q&A toward the end. So please start thinking of what questions you might have for all of them or one of them individually. And we're looking forward to having a great conversation on this. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Bill.
Well, thanks so much, Heidi. I'm going to assume that everyone can see my slides. It's really a pleasure to be with you today, and I thought I would just comment on a couple of advances that I think really are going to accelerate the impact of registries now and into the future. One of these is a high-tech advance, and the other is more of a high-touch advance. The high-tech advance that we're seeing is the ability of cloud-based platforms to really amplify the abilities of registries and data platforms. And by this, as we'll talk about, not just storing data in the cloud, but actually bringing analytic tools and collaborative workspaces to the cloud for working with the data. And then the registries really are not going to be that useful unless we can engage participants. And so I've been struck by really some of the modern strategies that have recently become available to support participant engagement, and I'll share some examples of that. This slide I've borrowed from my colleague David Glazer, who heads up our Terra platform, which is a cloud-based platform that supports biomedical research. And you know, many registries and other data repositories certainly may be shared in a central location, but traditionally users of these platforms will pull down the data and then do work on their local systems. This is not particularly efficient nor secure. And what we're seeing emerging are really much more sophisticated cloud-centric approaches. And here, security protocols can be much more robust. As well, the ability to control access can be quite sophisticated. By bringing the actual research tools, analytic tools into the cloud platform, this really facilitates a much more efficient use of the analysis. And what I think is particularly exciting is it facilitates collaboration. I mentioned Terra. This is a platform that is being built by Verily in collaboration with others. And for more information, you can go to terra.bio, and it's particularly the Broad Institute is our chief collaborator here. And the idea here is to build a platform that can bring together disparate types of data, whether it's omics data, molecular data, imaging data, clinical data, EHR data, patient self-reported data, and really bring this together in a way that these different types of data can be QC'd and curated and brought together in a useful way. This platform and others in the cloud can bring then integrated tools, either proprietary tools that people can contribute or more established tools that can then run analyses in a much more powerful manner. And as I mentioned before, this opportunity for collaboration is very exciting. You can have sophisticated security and provenance controls so people can contribute their data, have access to certain components of data, but not all, and really facilitate collaboration across organizations and users. A case example using the Terra platform is the NIH All of Us program. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. This is the effort to enroll 1 million Americans into a very sophisticated data platform and really establish a diverse database of health. The goal is 1 million participants who will share genetic data, patient-reported data like lifestyle information, electronic health records, other biological samples. And Terra is really at the center of this effort, where this cloud-based platform is not only facilitating data collection, but also the analytic tools. And really this then facilitates those who are producing, contributing the data, those who are developing tools that can be added to the platform for use by researchers, and then most importantly, really to have a workbench that qualified researchers can use to work with the data. The beta testing on this platform for All of Us began in May, and at least at that time, there were about 350,000 participants, 211,000 electronic health records, and 277,000 biosamples. So starting to become a very robust data platform. Another platform I wanted to highlight and focus on the engagement piece is the Verily Baseline platform, and that's an end-to-end platform for evidence generation designed to accelerate scientific discovery and improve health outcomes. And it really grew out of the fact that we're just not generating the evidence that's needed to support healthcare decisions for patients and clinicians. As you all know, the state of clinical evidence is suboptimal. A lot of healthcare decisions are not supported by evidence. Evidence generation, when it does exist, is slow and expensive, and health outcomes are not necessarily improving at the rate that we would like. A big part of this is we're just not seeing people engaged in clinical research and in evidence generation. So there's a real opportunity to educate people about the value of participating in registries and other forms of clinical research. But we've got to give them something back to make it worth their while. And I think that's one of the key learnings. And so when we began this baseline platform, it started out as a somewhat hybrid study, the Baseline Health Study, which enrolled 2,500 people across the country. It included in-person in-clinic visits at Stanford and Duke, as well as data collection at home and remotely using apps and wearable sensors, patient-reported outcomes. And this really formed the nucleus of engaging people to map out human health and to understand the transition between health and disease, and led to this broader baseline community, which you can think of as really a super registry. Right now we have about 230,000 participants. And there are also sub-registries focused on particular user groups and interests. This slide shows a collaboration we have with the American Heart Association focused on involving women in cardiovascular research, called Research Goes Red. And working with advocacy groups really can develop sub-communities, sub-registries of people that have similar interests and engage them and offer them opportunities to participate in research. The goals are really to have this integrated platform that brings together multiple stakeholders to facilitate the ingestion and integration of electronic health record data, to really understand patient engagement and continue to improve it across diverse populations and in diverse therapeutic areas, and then building this registry, this database, to then enable qualified researchers and clinicians to access the data. A big part of this is engaging participants so that they really want to contribute to clinical research. And here we're finding that we really have to meet people where they're at and understand what opportunities are available that really match their own values and circumstances. An example of this is the COVID-19 registry that we stood up in the spring. There's about 87,000 individuals enrolled in this thus far, and it's really an opportunity to educate people about clinical research opportunities and then to match them up to clinical trials for interventional therapeutics and vaccines, to provide education, but very importantly, I think, to give something back, to return results to people, to keep them engaged, keep them interested, give them something of value. And so we've been partnering to really help people understand the essential nature of clinical research, what it means to be a participant in research studies. We've provided expert Q&A sessions and videos to engage people. This particular one involved an antibody research program that people could enroll in for COVID. And then as they contribute data to the platform, to curate it and then provide some findings, at least at the aggregate level, back to people so that they can understand their contributions and become educated. And this is a particular example. We had done some surveys around psychological mental health issues, and these were just some results that were returned about people's reported responses. And then importantly, then offering some additional follow-up. And so we offered an online webinar for people around resilience and managing stress, and had quite a good response. So the idea is to keep engaging individuals as the program moves forward. So those are just a couple of advances that I thought were worth highlighting. Again, the power of cloud-based platforms, not only for data collection, ingestion, storage, curation, but also importantly for powerful analytic capabilities. And then in order to really build meaningful platforms, to really think about ways to engage participants to ensure not only their initial participation, but ongoing contribution. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'm going to turn it over to Sharon now, and Sharon is going to speak to the partnerships that we've all could potentially leverage with health information exchanges, and she's going to walk through a few slides, and hopefully we'll have some good discussion afterwards. Go ahead, Sharon.
Thank you, Heidi. I appreciate the presentation that Bill just gave. I think it's extremely important, and it helps lead into my discussion, which is really making a connection to that data availability. Next slide, please. The Strategic Health Information Exchange Collaborative, or SHEIC as we are known, is nonprofit, and we have 80 HIE members, both regionally, state, and community health information exchanges, with over 130 members, including strategic business and technology partners. We serve over 95% of the US population coast to coast, and have also availability in Hawaii and Alaska, and we are expanding into the international community now. SHEIC serves the communities by providing data that is collected and is offered as a single connection to bridge actually healthcare systems, private HIEs, providers, and many of the other entities such as social determinants of health and some of the work that they are doing. We provide near and real-time access to patient information. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to go over a little bit of how HIEs can support the work that we're doing, and particularly those of you that are working in the with registries and would like to have maybe a different access into some of the data and a broader population to work from. We connect, as I said, the healthcare systems and independent providers, and we fill the gap for most of the health information because longitudinal patient records only have so much information. We actually are able to work with other entities such as EMS, prisons, et cetera. I'll touch on that just a little bit in the next couple slides. But we try to integrate the electronic health records. We use pharmacy systems and can really provide a very comprehensive amount of information related to the patient. In addition, we do give care support to the patients. We've been able to work on initiatives to improve national interoperability, and I will go over a particular platform that we have, the Patient-Centered Data Home. It is our nationwide interoperability effort, and it allows for alerting and records to share among HIEs when patients require treatment outside their local area. The benefit to that obviously would be if individuals are in fact working with the HIE and have particular needs, those can be flagged and then shared with individuals, and the information would be available. Next slide, please. Some of the HIE services that are available through our HIEs would be patient matching services, master patient indexes. ADT alerts are probably the most prevalent that people understand and know about. We do a clinical data repository. There is clinician portals available. We are, in fact, doing a lot of work with quality mapping. Also, clinical message delivery. I think this is one that's very important. Again, if there are candidates available, particularly for your research study, the ability to have messaging delivered at real time is important. We're doing a lot of work in the patient population health management area right now. So again, I'll touch a little bit on that in just a moment, particularly around COVID. The other thing that's important, the transitions of care services. HIEs have the ability to interact and have data not only from a hospital or health system, but they also have data linked in through long-term care, skilled facilities, et cetera. So there's a more comprehensive amount of data that is collected. It gives you a more complete picture of what is going on with that patient at any one given time. Some of our HIEs have a provider directory, referral services, and patient-focused services. I would like to say with the HIEs that we have their degree of expertise is everywhere from those that are just starting out to those that have been in the area for over 20 years. So some of these services are ramping up in some of the areas, but for the most part, we've been very successful in working with our national partners, CMS, ONC, the CDC in particular through COVID, and providing dashboards also with patient information. It's de-identified aggregate data that is, again, very helpful in looking at some of those areas that you'd like to be covered within your registries. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of the things, as I mentioned, because we are a national organization, some of the states have developed other specific areas that have been very helpful. So one of the things that we have noticed most prominently is that particularly mental health or behavioral health has been a specific issue. We know that people have really tried to be effective in looking at CFR Part 2 in collecting information, and they have been able to do that. Arizona is an example of one that has very much excelled. I'm not going to go through the entire list here, but I will tell you that another one I would highlight is Nebraska. They lead the nation in PDMP, the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. They have over 1 million records and information that is available. Also, I'd like to talk a little bit about the end-of-life care. I think one of the areas that sometimes people overlook or don't know that we would have an availability to have the data readily available would be for those individuals that perhaps have signed a post or organ donation. Those kinds of things, I think, accentuate really a little bit of the information that we can have available. Another one, the real-time data that Oklahoma actually uses text between the patients and the providers. So again, this is just really highlighting the capabilities of what HIEs can offer, particularly as you are recruiting or working on some of your research projects and looking at the registry information. Next slide, please. This is a model of our what we call patient-centered data home. The patient-centered data home was born out of an idea actually a few years ago, and it is an initiative of SHIC, and it created a nationwide network connecting information exchanges. So I do have a depiction here at the bottom of how this would work. So we deliver patient information across state lines and across health systems, basically for improving patient experiences and making their health information available wherever it occurs. So an episode or an event would be triggered at the point of care for an individual. PCDH at that point then notifies providers, and the care event has occurred for those at the patient's home HIE, and confirms the availability and specific location of the clinical data. That enables the providers to initiate a simple query to access real-time information across state and regional lines and the care continuum. Then, we've closed the loop as far as that as far as the communication is concerned, and it's a very effective model. We have 45 HIEs that have signed a national agreement for interoperability. We have several regions across the United States, so that we have regional hubs currently, and that is how the operational information is transferred. Next slide, please. Just a brief note on COVID. We actually have done a great deal of work. We had provided weekly touch point calls, both with our HIE members and as well as our technology ops group, who are the experts in providing the structures to stand up the HIEs and the way that they are providing the information. We did a survey of our HIEs and really tried to make sure, or really find out how they have been able to provide the data that was asked of us, particularly data that was requested by the CDC. We had continuous meetings with the CDC and the White House Task Force on COVID, and we're able to provide examples of dashboards and the results that they were looking about. So the aggregation and alerting on this COVID testing results were very successful. HIEs provided that real-time alert. Labs and state health departments actually provided support for this. I will say that there was some lag in the data reporting from the two of the national labs, but we were able to effectively advocate for trying to make sure that a complete data set was available as our HIEs were populating their dashboards and collecting the information on the individuals that were within their scope. We have done predictive analytics. HIEs are employing, as I mentioned previously, population health analytics, and this is assisting in where the outbreaks are occurring. There's a centered guide to public health and community efforts. And lastly, the community coordination. They're on the front line with state and local stakeholders, coordinating discussions, ensuring the right information is flowing to those that need it and quickly and as effectively as possible. So that, I think when you think about an HIE and you look at community coordination and then build it up to state and then national, it's something that we are able to truly provide a comprehensive data flow. Next slide, please. Next slide.
That is the end of the presentation.
All right. Oh, thank you. If anyone has questions, we'll entertain those shortly. I'll turn this back over to you.
Thanks, Sharon. Appreciate that. It's very helpful to hear those examples. Now we're going to have Cory speak to CancerLink, which I think is a great model of what a clinical registry could be in the future for some of the groups listening on the phone. Thanks.
Thank you, Heidi, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning. For those of you who don't know what CancerLink is, the company is a wholly owned subsidiary of the American Society of Clinical Oncology, and our focus is the improvement of quality of care and practice operations through the use of transformational analytics. At its heart, we would be considered a cancer registry. To date, we have roughly 4 million total patients, 2 million patients that have been diagnosed with a cancer, roughly 1 million precancerous patient, and then about 1 million that are benign or hematological. We've been around for about 10 years since its inception. We've been in operation about 4 or 5 years and have comprised a network of cancer practices from a single individual oncologist with a PA, community practices, integrated hospitals, integrated networks, and academics. What we do at its heart is connect into the EHR system, into the medical record system, flow data into our staging environment, harmonize it, standardize it, run it through an EMPI, a master patient index, run it through a series of ontologies, and essentially clean up and standardize this data and represent it back to the practices through applications. Our primary business is a PHI business in service back to the practices. So unlike other organizations that we get lumped into, our business is not a business of data aggregation for research purposes. So that's where we differ a little bit from the traditional concept of a registry. The de-identified data set and the privilege that we have to serve the research community is only a result of providing value-add services back to the practice. Our primary application footprint is what we call a quality management platform we call SmartLink. And that SmartLink application set is our platform, which is a cloud-based platform, the ingestion routines, the cleanup routines, and a quality measures engine. We currently have 36 measures deployed in that footprint, primarily the COPI measures from ASCO, the Quality Oncology Practice Initiative. We do have QCDR capability and provide those services to our practices. So the quality management engine, the content that the quality management engine operates against, the measure definition, and different than most other organizations in this space, we also provide every participating practice access to our full de-identified data set. And we provide them access to that through an application we call Insights. And think of Insights as a way to ask medical questions of your peers. We have some canned pin boards that show up that give patient information, perhaps by tumor type, perhaps by drug classifications, perhaps by treatment regimen. And along with the insights, we give the practices a view of, let's call it, their quality performance versus benchmarks of practices like themselves through a set of standard reports. And I describe what we do not to differentiate or segregate from research. Research is extremely important. We serve the research community through a channel partner, set of channel partners that serve the commercial industry, and we serve the academic, the government, and the nonprofit societies through a product which we call CancerLink Discovery. And those are full de-identified data sets, usually carved up by tumor type, so a data cut available. And we have a collaboration and a partnership with the American Heart Association, and we use their precision medicine platform to deploy those data sets to the research community. So very, very similar to what Bill described in the first part of this presentation, the cloud-based tools, the cloud-based value-add services to make data and information available to the researcher while still controlling access, controlling security, controlling the refresh rate, and controlling the use agreements in terms of what the researcher can actually use the data for. Instead of building that cloud platform out ourselves, we've decided to white label one that was already in the market from one of our sister societies. I say all of this matter-of-factly in the sense that we don't view ourselves as a registry. We view ourselves as a business that is focused on value-add services to the practice, our practice network, and they provide us data to clean up for them, to put into a form that is useful, and provide back to them in the context of, quote unquote, those that are asking for it. And those that are asking for it are other registries. We do have a Registry Export capability that once we've standardized, run this through our ontologies, run it through an EMPI, and expose the data, expose the information back to the practices. We have a number of practices who use that then to go find, what do I need to report to my state registry? What do I need to report to other disease-specific registries that want this piece of information, or that want this list of patients or pieces of the information. At the same time, we import registry data. So we have a number of large, especially academic practices, who provide us registry files as data augmentation to, let's call it, the lack of structured data that we get out of the EMR. We get both structured and unstructured. So we get structured data and doctor's notes and clinician notes and attachments. And as many of you know, the abstraction of that data from the unstructured content into structured text is typically a very human intensive and cost prohibitive process. We had one particular practice that said they spend about 100 hours a quarter in overtime for the nurses to go in and abstract the charts to provide data to registries in structured format that they're expecting. And that's a big difference, is we don't ask the subscribing practices to provide us data in cleaned up form. we take it in the form that comes out of their source systems, and we do the cleanup work. So as we think about the future and as we think about our future, the destination that CancerLink is on, or the journey that we're on getting to that destination, is to provide value-add services and enable these value-add services back to the practices, with a destination that we serve 50% of the US cancer care population within a 5-year period. And that represents somewhere between 800 and 900 practices, which is it's a tall order. So our strategy with this SmartLink platform and the tools that we're adding to it is to be a facilitator, to be an enabler, similar to what we just heard from Sharon in the HIE, but very much focused on the complexity of cancer data and the longitudinal experience of a patient as they go through their cancer care. So long as we're working with these providers to provide, or these technology providers to deliver services back to the practice, we can work on the PHI inside that practice and combine the work of our two organizations, where one organization may not have the wherewithal to do the whole picture. And I'll give an example of prior auth. As anybody in the medical field knows, prior auth is becoming more routine and more pervasive because of some of the complexity of the benefit programs and the changes in release of drugs and treatment paths to the practice community. So we have found a partner who has, let's call it, some proprietary software that understands how to read benefit plans. They read the documents and understand the conditions and understand the format in which data needs to be represented back into the payers for the prior auth process. What they're lacking is a direct wiring to the events that are happening or the orders that are being put into the system to understand that a prior auth may be necessary. We have that wire. We get cases every single evening. We get data from our practices every single night. Some nights it's 500 records, some nights it's 10,000 records, some nights it's 300,000 records, which roll in or get updated in our system. So by combining our knowledge of that longitudinal record and understanding the ontology or the standardization of what's being ordered, passing off that PHI record to the party that has read what is required to submit into the payer, the combination of the two systems helps streamline the cost prohibitive nature of the prior auth process. We're not suggesting that we're going to eliminate it. Our focus is how do we minimize the cost burden and the administrative overhead of many of these processes that are coming into play, or many of the requirements that are coming into play. The tools that are required and sort of how we think about getting to this ubiquitous platform that enables the access back into the practices in their workflow is really at the heart of it is complete, non-missing, accurately representing the medical record that was intended by the doctor when they incorporated their structured and unstructured content. So our focus is for the next year or 2-3 years is raising that data, that transactional data that is moving through the system into a knowledge record. And the knowledge record is really the language that oncologists use or nurses use, things like regimen or line of therapy or drug class or time on therapy, time to discontinuation, the words that get used every single day by oncologists, but are never recorded in the data. So we will be implementing a series of machine learning algorithms and natural language processing tools to extract the doctor's notes and the unstructured text and the ontology that they use in their language, and representing that as augmented information in the medical record that we represent back to the doctors, the practices, the subscribing practices, and those partners that we have that are going to use that PHI data and deliver services back to the practice. Because that data will then be structured content and just an abstraction and a reflection of what the doctor recorded, it becomes extremely valuable to the research community as well. Because in oncology, the way that commercial or industry thinks about cohorts that they need to build or research paths that they want to use real world data for, they need to know that medical intent, and they always have to code through R or SAS or whatever their favorite analytic coding tool is, those same bits of information, typically their time legs or their pathways. And if you think of a Sankey diagram and a patient's journey, they have to program that patient's journey. We are going to be creating the patient's journey in structured format. So it's not just about data collection tools anymore. It's not just about data. The data is interesting, but it's the knowledge, and it's the knowledge layer that our subscribing doctors, the oncologists, see their language, they see their medical intent, instead of just looking at the data that was put in there so they could get paid, which is kind of what the EHR data capture mechanism is for. If I think about the future, right? The future is all of this costs money. And, Heidi early on talked about business models and represented some thought processes around business models. One of the reasons that we shifted a couple of years ago to really focus on value add, value add, value add, value add, and everything that we do within CancerLink, we ask a simple question. Are we furthering our mission? Are we furthering our delivery of value to the practices, or are we taking away from it? And I'm catching myself a little bit here, because practice, the subscribers, the doctors are the only thing that we think about. Yes, we serve the research community, and as a result of the collection of these 4 million patient records, there's high value to the research community. But the way we think about it is it's an important secondary business that we have a privilege that our member practices afford us to be able to serve that research community. So it's extremely important to us to serve it. It's extremely important for us to clean up the data. It's important for us to make sure that it's meaningful and non-missing, but first in the context of how the practice will use it, and that automatically will flow through as value to the research community. So some pitfalls to, thinking about, it's not cheap. It's not cheap. The just holding this many data records and to put it into context, we've added 1.2 million patient records this year. Before the end of the year, we have line of sight, as we're activating and bringing practices on board, about another 500,000 patients, roughly 2 billion lab results in our database, and drug orders and drug administrations approaching 1 billion. So the volume of dealing with and holding this data should not be underestimated. The people cost to manage the processes, just because you code data once, or just because you code a data element the first time while you're onboarding a practice, that doesn't mean it's clean. Every day there may be a different abbreviation which is put in for a drug. So every time we import data, every single night, our rules have to run, our cleanup has to run, and exceptions need to be managed. So it is extremely expensive from a headcount standpoint and a processing standpoint to provide these services. So as we go through and do our annual plan and budget, it's always about where is that next line of revenue coming from to make sure that we don't shift and just get pulled from the research community and, you know, big pharma and the dollars that may flow from a data aggregation. We have to think about a self-sustaining business while providing these services back to the practice and the community that wants access to the practices. Another pitfall is oversimplifying the act of wiring into another EHR, the act of flowing the process, the data through, and the act of our interpretation of the data versus how it was entered into the EHR. You'll always go through this back and forth of that wasn't the intent, you coded this wrong, you coded that wrong. And the time it actually takes to get an accurate representation in a registry like this versus the intent of when data was entered. So you can't underestimate the data management layer. Finally, and I mentioned just as we were getting ready for this call, security, privacy, HIPAA compliance, the patient, thinking about the patient and the burden of responsibility that you have when you're handling PHI. We are a PHI business, hard stop. And we live security. We don't think about it, we live it, which means every action you take, which means every decision you make, which means every process that is in place has a security question about it. Is it enhancing our security position or is it weakening it? And every single day, we have a security and compliance department that we get reports from, monthly audit reports, monthly operations review. You have to live security. If you're thinking about it, it's too late. It's absolutely too late. It just has to be ingrained in every action, every person, every single thing that they do, and thinking about the unintended consequences of that one click, that one slip where you're snapping PHI and saying, can somebody take a look at this? Always, always, always just behavioral change. And that creates this different culture of responsibility, different culture of hyper awareness. And, you know, don't take it lightly, because if you do, you know, there's a pretty significant unintended consequences. So I thank you for your time. I'm very much open to questions. I could talk about CancerLink all day, but Heidi, back over to you.
Thanks so much, Cory. So we have about 11 minutes left before we have to head on to the next session. But I wanted to open this up. First of all, if there's anyone on the phone, I keep forgetting, we're on a webinar. Anyone on the webinar who has a question, we have some really smart people on the phone or on the webinar who just presented. Is there something that you need them to dive deeper into? Is there something, a question that you have? And I'm going to kick this off. The question I have that I'm trying to think through kind of as we morph and change, both with what we're doing around clinical quality, the access to data that we may or may not have now. And I know there are quite a few groups who are listening who may have a clinical registry that was standing and they've been using it for multiple uses, research, what have you. There are other groups though that have created a clinical registry to meet the needs for their members specifically for MIPS quality reporting, right? And we're to the point, I think, where they may need to think about broadening their services, shifting their mission a little bit more to be able to remain financially sustainable, to meet the needs of their members. And the question I have from each of you is, where would I start? What are the opportunities that the things you talked about today might be helpful for them to think about moving forward. Bill, are you okay if I start with you first?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the audience there's probably a heterogeneous sort of group of registries and data platforms. As I was listening to the presentations, I was thinking that it's somewhat of an artificial distinction between clinical care and research. And, I guess one thing that's always important is just to understand the target use cases, but also how to link care and research. And also maybe, depending on the nature of the registry, is there an opportunity to join forces around better data harmonization with others to perhaps build something that's more powerful and cross-cutting? So I don't know if that's a specific enough answer, but I think it's really taking stock of the state of the existing registry for that organization. Is it serving its intended uses? Can those uses be broadened? What would increase the impact?
Sure. Sharon, any thoughts from the HIE perspective? I do think there's
I think both there's an opportunity to make connections. I apologize. I'm having a lot of difficulty hearing right now.
Uh-oh. Let me try unmuting you, Sharon. Well, while we work on that, Cory, maybe you can go next, and then hopefully Sharon's back.
Yeah, I think if the registries are assessing change and assessing sort of where their future is, I'll go back to the comment that I made when I started this, right? Our destination, our long-term goal is to facilitate a meaningful application on the desktop of 50% of the US oncologists in the United States. You have to define a destination. You have to define an identity of where you want to be and what you want to do. QCDR was a good forcing factor. CMS drove that with CHIPS and MIPS and so forth. And there was a destination to say, we're going to provide the service for fill in the blank, whatever that therapeutic was or the geography was. But as that becomes more ubiquitous in the EHRs and companies like ours and others, think 3 years, think 5 years down the line and put an audacious goal in place and work backwards from that. Because otherwise you're just sort of stepping along to whatever is the next pain point. And we all know that adoption of these types of registries, it takes 2-3 years to get adopted for that next thing. So without a destination, you're kind of just fumbling along.
No, that makes sense. Particularly, I think they had the destination, a lot of them, right? It was to be the QCDR. I think it is shifting it. We do have a couple questions that have come in. So the one question is, the pathway from EHR data to evidence is complex. It's probably an understatement. Has the panel seen an example where registry data impacts clinical guideline development, or possibly foresee an example? Should we do Bill, I guess?
Well, I was actually going to ask Cory. I mean, given the wealth of cancer data that you've collected, right? It just strikes me that this would be a particular opportunity to inform guideline development. I'm just wondering if that's part of what you guys are doing.
Yeah, Christopher, I would agree with you 100%, right? Real world data is not real world evidence. And we're very proud to say that we had 13 abstracts represented at the ASCO show this last spring. And only 2 of those were produced by CancerLink. The rest of them were produced by external sources. I think in oncology specifically, because that's the only thing I can really speak to, we're moving down the path and on the cusp of using that real world evidence for a number of different things. synthetic control arms within trials, while it's not fully accepted yet, the FDA is moving down that path. The oncology team there, Dr. Pazder's, cross FDA Center of Excellence is very much working with firms like ourselves and everybody else in the data aggregation space to get to that destination. The challenge that we have, and I think the challenge that has to be overcome, is while at trial, a patient is managed, right, to very, very specific endpoints and to very specific analysis throughout the trial. Real world data is a course of care. And doctors do the same things. They make the same assessments, but you don't have the data captured. So I think if we're going to get down to this guideline development and synthetic control arm and pragmatic trials, which ASCO's TAPER is very much a pragmatic trial that uses real world data to inform themselves about shutting down a cohort or standing up a cohort. The process by which evidence is assessed is going to have to change. And it's a catch-22. You have to have the evidence to show that evidence should change, yet you want the evidence that change should be there before you'll support it to be the source of change. So I think we're on a journey. There's enough parties involved now. Technology has evolved to a point where there's a little bit more peer-reviewed evidence that when you compare a trial to real-world data and you see the same survival curves, you see the same treatment regimens being delivered, you see the same outcomes, that the correlation is starting to move in a path where we'll get there. We'll get there.
Great. Bill, I see you answered that one question from Bill Lawrence, but should we, in the 3 minutes we have left, would it be worthwhile talking about how groups are leveraging broad infrastructure and what the business model looks like? Or is that best to leave it to Sean?
Well, I think this particular question was with regard to the Terra Broad platform, and I know that there are different business models there. Part of the platform intent is for academic researchers, but then there are also use cases for commercial entities like pharma companies, for example. So the product manager there, Sean Horgan, probably can best answer questions around different opportunities for collaboration and how those business models work.
Okay, great. I did want to kind of circle back to what we were just talking about, the building of the evidence. And one question I had was, I think there's a balance between patient input and engagement. And we're seeing, especially with COVID, a lot of patients have either created their own registries or it's been building into current registries. Have you all encountered examples of how you're building clinical evidence, balancing what you see in literature and data versus what patients are providing, and how you find that middle ground? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's really sort of validating, right? The self-reported data. Yeah. And that's also, I think, a complicated journey. But I think here we're really, that's where if you can ingest EHR and claims data and other sources to sort of triangulate, sometimes that can be helpful. Or that's where, frankly, adding in digital devices to do at-home, assessments and monitoring of physiology and function and activity, I think where you incorporate some more objective quantitative measures, with the truth labels provided by the patient is the way we're going to get to that.
I couldn't agree with you more, Bill. Random patient data being thrown in and treated as evidence, I think, is what everybody is deathly afraid of.
Yeah.
I think, there's a number of companies that have done a really good job of putting structure and, I think, appropriate intent into the workflow of capturing that data, not necessarily sensor data, but the real data that you want. You know, how long did it take you to feel nauseated after you received your last infusion? Right? I mean, that time to sort of adverse event or time to condition is extremely important when you start looking at changing guidelines in terms of dosing and frequency and so forth. So I firmly believe that there's, similar to clinical trials, but maybe not to that extent, but a framework that helps educate the patient on what capturing real meaningful data is versus anecdotal data that you can't really act on, you can't really use. Right. Yeah. And I think the PROs, the patient reported outcomes that are going down that direction of non-intrusively, seamlessly in the course of the behavior of the individual to be able to guide them to answer the questions like what Bill described. Yeah. I see that as the future. Great. No, thank you. Now we're at time. So first I want to thank all of you for listening, and to Cory, Bill, and Sharon for participating. Just a reminder that the Industry Partners Hall starts now before the afternoon sessions. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.